Hello, listeners. Welcome to another episode of the Jacob Shapiro Podcast. I am rejoined by Jacek Bartosiak on the podcast. He is the founder of Strategy&Future, one of the most insightful geopolitical analysts in Poland and, for my money, that is out there in the world. And also, I hope Jacek won't mind if I claim him as a friend as well. I think that looks better on me than anyone else. So thank you, Jacek, for coming on. Our schedules were really mismatched, and I blew it. I actually forgot to show up for our first recording here, and Jacek still consented to get on the show with me and record. So thank you, Jacek, for that. Listeners, if you want to talk about anything you heard on this podcast, you can email me at jacob@bespokeadvisory.io or jacob@cognitive.investments or jacob@jacobshapiro.com, or you can find me on Twitter, anything else. Also, Jacek is working on an interesting thing called Play of Battle. It's a video game that's tied to things around geopolitics. If that's something that interests you, Google it. It's interesting what they're doing just from a sort of intellectual perspective. And if you want to hear more about that too, we can also talk about that too. So enough from me. On to the conversation with Jacek. Cheers and see you out there. All right, listeners, I want you to know the dedication of both of the guests who are going to be on this podcast. First of all, so we're recording on a Sunday. Jacek is literally in a mall. His children are watching him do this from across from him. My children are running around upstairs. I can hear them. Their mother trying to get them down for a nap. So we care about you that much that we're getting together to record. Jacek, it's really nice to see you. The beard is looking great, by the way. Every time I see you, the beard looks more and more regal, and I feel more and more insecure about myself.
Thanks. Thanks for the compliments. Thanks for, having me on your show. My beard is controversial in my family, so, depending on which daughter I'm asking, they have, various opinions. So it changes.
Yeah, I think one of the worst moments of my wife's life was when I tried a mustache for about a week. I think that was all she was about willing to have for. But anyway, people are not here to listen to us talk about our facial hair. Jacek, where should we start? Do you want to start with, I guess we should start with the Russia-Ukraine war and about your perspective of where it's at. It seems to me that the war is not going particularly well for Ukraine. It's also not going particularly well for Russia. It seems like both sides are having economic problems. Both sides are having manpower problems. The Russians are not able to break through Ukrainian defenses at the front line, but the Russians are also not able to take back land in Kursk, and Ukrainian operations continue there, and Western capacity. It's been slow for weapons and things like that to get to the Ukrainians, but slowly but surely they're building up stockpiles and sort of making their way there. The last time you were on the podcast, I think you were relatively pessimistic about the situation from Ukraine's point of view. Where are you right now, sort of emotionally and analytically, regarding the nuts and bolts of the conflict?
Yeah, okay. In terms of military affairs, the war witnessed a major breakthrough in the conduct of war, which should be a lesson for everybody, including the United States force. Uh, you know, but I think we will not dive deep into it unless you say otherwise. And this brought us to the kind of a stalemate of and the death of the maneuver for the time being. It has happened many times throughout the history. But because war is not the kinetic exchange only, war is a political struggle, and war is using the modern language, is the forced exchange of information who's winning politically, so to speak, okay? Because the parties didn't agree at the beginning who has an upper hand, and they had to come to this exchange of information, kinetic information by the kinetic means. And what I'm saying is strategically, Russia has shaped the confrontation in a way that it is winning, okay? Even if it's not winning on the battlefield per se, because it sees lands. It has it shaped the confrontation in domains where Russia has an upper hand in manpower and in production capability and in money and resolve, political resolve, uh, and how it kind of commits forces to the front. Okay. Also, Russia shaped the economic environment in a way that, despite problems, it has not suffered as much as the West thought due to sanctions. And this is the very important lesson for all of us. So this is number one. The second thing is that it may change in the long run. The current situation on the battlefield is that Ukrainians are not interested in the truce now. At the same time, they are not interested in attrition the forces now because they have shortages of manpower, and politically because the people don't want to serve anymore, and also intellectually they don't want to commit younger soldiers below 25 because they are running out of people. They don't want to lose the future, and they're right. And basically, for the American audience now, Eastern Europeans, Central Eastern Europeans react with anger at the words of, a national advisor of Trump, what's his name, Wolf, yeah, that they should be committing more younger troops to front to stabilize if they want to have democracy. I would recommend the Americans to really be more shy about it, saying it. Maybe the Americans should commit more younger generation to the battlefield in Europe if they want to keep their primacy and agency in Europe. And this is the mood in Europe. So that, people in the US should know that. Okay. It's not a one-way street if you want to have primacy. And this is exactly what Trump heard from the AfD leader, yeah, in her podcast. What the Germans are telling the Americans. You can't have the empire and also don't have the cost in the empire. You can't you can't have a cake and eat a cake. Okay, so we will talk about it later. But the Ukrainians are not interested in truth now, but they are not also interested in committing forces. At the same time, they are waging war on someone else's money, but on their own blood. The Russians are conducting the war on their own blood and with their own money. So the Ukrainians are believing that later this year and next year, the Russians will really suffer economically more, and they will be more prone to have the ceasefire. Because the Ukrainians don't believe in permanent ceasefire. If in Kiev there is a government that really want to have the independent Ukraine, then the interests lead to inevitable conflict with Russia, even if there is no Donbass and Crimea within this new Ukraine. I think the most important part will be this kind of truce or ceasefire, if negotiated. We can discuss what conditions of those would be, and who will win the elections that will be coming in Ukraine. I think there is a great chance that for the first time ever, the winning people will be the people who really devoted their fate to the fate of Ukraine and its militaries. Military intelligence, military itself, new industry, military industry that grew around UAV, drones, cruise missiles that uh, are legion now in the Ukraine industry. And this will be new political elite and new money in Ukraine that will win, especially that 1 million soldiers, a few 100,000 crippled soldiers, injured, yeah, wounded, and crippled, and their families will vote. And they know who was with them in the field. And this is critically important. Even if they lose the war militarily and losing Donbass and Crimea, it's critically important for them to win and create the conditions for the victory of peace. It happens. You may lose war, but like West Germany won the peace, sort of. And Japan, even China lost the war to Vietnam, but Deng Xiaoping had this good excuse to get rid of conservative elements towards the reforms. We can sometimes lose the war, but win the peace if there are some political conditions fulfilled. And all those new people, I think, will want to deregulate the Ukraine economy, create this kind of a shining new hill in Europe, because they have good reasons to believe that this is the case. They will have the modern military. They, in terms of resources like titanium, uranium, lithium, they have in the West. They have I think, according to my knowledge, they have the largest deposits of those minerals that you need for modern economy, even if the Donbass and Crimea are off. And I think this will be the political plan in Ukraine. And those people will also reach out to Poland to create the intermarium. because they need Poland for security balance. Since any kind of reform towards that direction will be met with resistance from Russia, and the war may, be reopened, reignited if there is no proper conventional balance of forces that keeps Russia in check. So Poland will be needed. So that's the plan. That's what might happen. But of course, it will be very difficult to bring Russians to the negotiating table now if United States are not going to grant concessions to Russia, major concessions, because Russians are thinking they are winning the war. And it's not only about Ukraine, it's about the security architecture in Europe and the political status of my, for example, beautiful country. As always, a major war in the intermarium, decides the fate of the intermarium nations. So it's life. So that's my rough assessment. You may go into details if you want.
Yeah, I mean, we'll be lucky if we get through all of the implications there. But I think you've already hit on the key thing, which is if Russia is winning in the current context, there's no reason for them to come to a negotiating table, especially if the plan is for Ukraine to win the peace, as you put it so eloquently.
Yeah.
Because if Western Ukraine is just going to become, okay, so maybe they won't officially be in NATO, but if they become the Israel of the European Union, sort of outside all the technical organizations, but armed to the teeth and given all of the technology and all of the support, and Russia can't push any further, that's a net loss for Russia. So you have to think that Russia's key goal is going to be break the Ukrainian front lines. And on the opposite side, no matter what's happening politically in Ukraine, Ukraine has to hold the front lines. They can't break, and they have fewer men and fewer, less equipment than Russia does. So what brings Russia to the table? I can't imagine it's going to be President Trump threatening tariffs and other economic damage. As one Russian analyst out on this podcast to me a year ago, we're Russian. We can outsuffer all of you. You think we need the French wine and the baguettes and all the fancy stuff? Like, we're fine. Obviously, that was a propaganda line, but still, like, the Russians are pretty good at suffering. So how do you sort of think about that balance?
First of all, I think that the sanctions backfire. U.S. sanctions backfired. I know it's not very popular opinion across the United States to realize that the United States is not calling the shots anymore in the world in terms of the economic development. And this is the first time since, record memory, and maybe the first time in 500 years of the West dominating the Atlantic zone of economy and the capitalism. I think the sanctions actually didn't make Russia suffer that much. Plus, it created vulnerabilities for the United States. So, plus they're leaky. I mean, they don't work out very much. So, what I think is that first Trump will be upset. He will try to escalate vertically by providing the Ukrainians with more weapons and munitions. Then he will press Ukrainians to commit more younger, fresh troops to the front line, which will be reluctantly, the Ukrainians will be cheating because they don't want to do it. And so there will be frustration in the U.S. administration that there is no American agency in Eurasia. So then there will be an idea to impose. So far, the tariffs were so-called um, treasure sanctions as opposed to admiralty sanctions. So sanctions, on the flows, I mean, how you operate on the world markets, trading, exchange systems. And the admiralty sanctions is blockade or quarantine, blockade of physical movement in the Baltic and in Yuk. Probably that's why Trump suggested this Greenland deal to make Russians think that, maybe we'll come back to this, concept of blockading the Yuk, and our NATO friends will blockade the Baltic shipment for good. And this way, we can also surround the Kaliningrad enclave and cut it off from the Baltic states and from the Baltic. And I think it's in the cards this year. Okay? Let me remind you that he's negotiating with Danes about this Greenland, and it's Denmark that is controlling the Baltic Strait also, which is a critical choke point for the Russian leaky black, smuggling of. So I think that there will be a horizontal escalation, and the Russians will feel it's a major escalation. So they will try to, they will. I think they will. They might initiate the peripheral campaign of hybrid warfare against Baltic states and Poland.
Hmm.
Because
Interesting. Well,
Jacob, my opinion is that, and I wrote a book which will be released next month about it. It's called the Eyes Wide Open, Poland's strategy for the World War. Because I think that we are in a world war since February 2018. It's a systemic war, more or less, in every century since Christopher Columbus set sail for the New World, and since the inception of capitalism, there is a systemic war because the imbalances of interest resulting from the imbalances of productivity end up in this all this concept of Wallerstein and and other guys like Napoleonic Wars was a systemic war, First and Second World Wars were systemic wars. 7 Years' War was a systemic war, and even 30 Years' War was a systemic war about the shape of edifice of capitalism. So we are in the next one, and it was initiated by the Trump's decision to impose sanctions on China in March 2018 because the system was working to the detriment of the United States. So the United States decided to abolish it. So right now we are in the free ride, and the system is not made. So there's a chaotic system. Luckily, we have all nuclear weapons, so it
luckily.
creates a cushion that people, decision makers, need to control the escalation ladder and the moves within this escalation ladder. They can't resort to the nuclear exchange to impose politically on others. So they need to, and the American policy towards war in Ukraine was an epitome of this, trying to control the escalation horizontally and vertically, and also, not to commit troops. And still, it was about who sets the rules of security architecture and exchange, in the world. So this is exactly. So we are in the war. We are in the war, and it's just the opening salvo of this war. And war in Ukraine is just the opening salvo. Also, I think that the decisions that Trump is making now, or is promising to make, are, I mean, consequences of being in war, of what the edifice of the world capitalism should be like, with all consequences. There are some front lines, like somewhere in the east, here and there, but basically there is a major reshuffle of productivity forces, innovation forces, markets, correlation of agencies, and so on and so forth. So that's my opinion.
Yeah, Pippa Malmgren is the first one I saw sort of develop the World War III thesis, and maybe I would quibble with you on a semantic basis, which is just I agree with you that that's the trajectory that we're headed. It seems to me, and like you said we're in the early stages. So are the early stages of a world war actually a world war? Is it? I sort of view us as like the 1890s, early 1900s. But in the context of that, we've talked about Russia and the United States and Ukraine. But I think we need to get to, before we get to your beautiful country, and I want to get to your beautiful country, it seems to me that the two countries that are the two swing players here more than any, and maybe I should throw China in here, but it seems to me Germany with its elections in March is a big sort of point of inflection. And then Turkey is just sitting there in the Mediterranean. They're taking advantage of Assad falling. They're pushing the Russians on different levels, but also engaging with the Russians. If the intermarium is going to fly, probably Turkey needs to be there. And Turkey, I think, could go a long way towards helping stabilize the Ukrainian front if they really wanted to. So talk to me about your views of both Germany and Turkey. Am I looking to the wrong place for inflection, or do you think that there's some meat there?
Let's start with Turkey, which is easier. The Turkish leaders properly predicted the demise of the American leadership, American premises. I'm not saying that the recipes they propose were good for Turkey, but I think they acted in the belief that there is no other way because the chaos is coming. So they prepare themselves. They prepare their maneuverability. They prepare their armed forces, even in industry, a bit, yeah, to be independent from the Americans. And now they yield fruits on that. And also they do it for security reasons. There is a vacuum of power following the Mesopotamian wars where the United States was involved. And in order to be secure, you need to create buffer zones and so on and so on. So they're trying to survive. They're trying to survive. They also are in the middle between Eurasian landmass and Europe. I think they are of the opinion that China's rise is inevitable. That the US, I heard it from the Turkish ambassador in Warsaw many years ago. Jacek, your beautiful country, we had so many wars with you. That's what he said. Because for your American audience, we had the empire, Poland had Commonwealth, and there was Turkish Empire, and we were fighting over Ukraine, basically, and the Black Sea Basin. So for many, like 2 or 3 centuries. So, but we both lost because Russia defeated both of us. But he said to me, "What's going on with you guys? You used to have an empire. Don't you see that the American power is ebbing away from Eurasia?" And he used those exact words in English. We spoke in English. US power is ebbing away from Eurasia. The chaos is coming. Don't you see it? Aren't you getting ready? It was, like 5, 6 years ago when he said that to me in Warsaw. So what I'm saying is that Poland didn't get ready as much as Turkey did, in its own realm, its own, field of choice. And what I think is also that Trump, willingly or unwillingly, by his decisions with respect to Israel and the war that is right now happening, in Israel and around, is okay. Maybe it will be very controversial, but for the last plus 20 years, the Americans were trying to contain Israel in a way that like, don't attack Iran without our kind of involvement and so. And Americans were paying the political currency for that, because Israel managed to be quite independent to behave as it wished. And Trump, by fully supporting now Israel and even committing more than Israel officially wants, I think has a great chance, and it will be what I'm saying, will be very pervert in a way, because Israel always defended its own interest and not American interest in the Middle East, starting from the Cold War, right? Even, the military didn't cooperate that much. There was no contingency planning combined, and now, because American power is ebbing away from the Middle East, Americans don't have the power and don't want to commit that much to the secondary or even tertiary theater by emboldening Israel to do what it wants militarily. It may pass the burden of escalation and running the show to Israelis, which is a burden. You can't say, you know what, US is behind us and we don't care. Now Israeli may be trying to create its own balance on behalf of Americans. So I wouldn't be that happy if I were the Israelis that that the Trump's allowing everything because it comes with price. You know what I mean? I don't know if my English is good enough to
Yes,
convey what I'm saying.
I would say that Trump is writing checks that the Israelis will have to cash, and that they don't necessarily want to be the ones to do it or have the capability to do it.
Kind of. Although it seems like freedom of maneuver, but life is more complicated. Kind of. This is my hunch. Okay, hunch
Hmm.
that this may end up like that, and Israel will be running U.S. policy. I mean, it will be for the benefit of United States policy in the Middle East because Americans will be digging the petrol, the oil and the gas. It will not need Middle East at all. and it will be interested in prices that America dictates. And America could instrumentalize Israel to create either peace or war in the process without US presence. So the roles may reverse. You know what I mean, Jacob?
Yeah.
Because the structure of relationship is changing due to many other aspects, like, the new economic policy. Because United States doesn't want to run the policy of primacy anymore and maintain the proper behavior of other countries. It may resort to offshore balancing from distance, and it's good enough for this new economic policy in a post-Bretton Woods system where everything will be reshuffled.
Yeah, but it won't work because Turkey is there. Like this is Turkey's game to call. Like the U.S. and Israel are dreaming if they think together they're going to call the shots if the U.S.
I
is not
know.
completely committed.
I don't feel like a utmost expert in the Middle East. I just shared my opinion in that. I hope I maintained my modesty in saying that I'm not top-notch expert on the Middle East. Okay. Speaking of Germany, this is fun. This is fun
I know. I love
because
asking Polish friends about Germany. It's one of my favorite pastimes.
this is fun. On one hand, I mean, it's a complicated matter. I always tell my structurally the the German economy would choose the continental cooperation with China if it were free to decide, and if the German business were free to decide. Politicians are not always like that. The new chancellor Merz is a pro-Atlantic, but he will have pressure from business. Energy prices are rising. Decoupling from China would kill Germany. The new American trade policy may kill the German social contract. They are in chaos. They don't know what to do. But if Trump exaggerates with sanctions against Europe, if if Trump exaggerates sanctions with trade Europe, the Western Europeans will make a big trade deal with China. Mark my words, because they will know how other way out. And we will have peace in Eurasia, and the US will be gone from Eurasia, and it will have its own Galapagos system in America, because America's economy is smaller than Eurasia, many times smaller. Okay? Americans don't realize that. Controlling the financial system is not everything, and this is exactly the systemic war between the fi- financial system, power, and the productivity power. And you know, speaking of Marx and so on, and the German economy structurally tends to be with China, and Trump cannot overdo sanctions. That's my advice to Donald Trump, because Europeans will move to autonomy. And autonomy means keeping the globalization open with China and Europe and having a big trade deal. And Chinese will give us concessions to survive 10 or 20 years because it will be in their interest. Americans cannot overdo it.
Will those concessions include telling Russia to stop the
Yeah,
war or
exactly.
else? Yeah. Okay.
Exactly, because the Chinese control Russia, so they will be interested in peace. We will have peace like that without the United States. And I'm telling you that the French and Germans are thinking about it along those lines.
Okay. And what about your beautiful country? What are they thinking about
Yeah,
there?
but and what can we say? What can we say? Of
You,
course, my strategy in future, we had this policy of creating the military that is capable of, how to say it in English, uncontrollable escalation without the US or European, agency in it. So that we have the military who can terminate and start the wars in intermedium. So then we need to be reckoned with, yeah, in the process. You know what I mean?
yeah.
But our beautiful politicians are sons of the geopolitical pause of American leadership. So they act within the norms, as opposed to Turks, within the norms of appropriateness. So for 30 years, you couldn't talk about that. So when I started talking about like 5 years ago, I was a revolutionary. Now it's more or less a mainstream already. That we need to have deep strike on our own targeting, capability to annihilate Kaliningrad enclave, and you know, but still, it's our politicians anathema for our politicians. But otherwise, we'll need to follow. We are in Europe. We are in Europe, in the European macroeconomic system. We will need to adhere to it, no matter what. This is what's going to happen. So the Americans shouldn't believe that we will follow them if they go to offshore balancing and they will, destabilize the systems.
Well, let me just underscore that. So, I mean, if France and Germany decide to take this hypothetical deal that you're talking about, you don't think there's a space for Poland to be a leader in Eastern Europe to push back against that and to leverage
Oh,
maybe
but
relationships with the UK,
but
the United States?
no,
Like,
no
no.
chance because our trade policy is dictated by Brussels. They send money, they collect it. I mean, they control our corporate system. EU is a monster. They control. They control things. They control things. I
So
mean,
no.
I don't want. Of course, politicians will be telling the Americans. That's why I'm saying Americans cannot overdo the sanctions. They don't. They shouldn't believe that we are a Trojan horse that will follow the Americans, especially that the Americans do not propose incentives for the allies these days. The new era of American greatness is not proposing incentives for the allies. This is exactly the opposite from the times of the Cold War, Jacob. And even on top of that, the American economy is much weaker relatively to the rest of the world as it was during the Cold War. And structurally, American economy is not innovative enough relative to the rest of the world. Americans may not have understanding of this.
Yeah, they probably don't. I mean, yeah. I mean, we are still a center of research and innovation, but
Yes,
we don't make things anymore. Like that's a big
exactly.
problem.
And it's about production. It's a it's a mutiny of production folks against US financial power and structural power. Basically, this is exactly what's happening in the world. And I'm
Yeah.
not talking about us because we want the US to maintain primacy. But this is exactly what Germans are saying. They produce what the heck? Who controls the profits from the production? The system says it's the US. So, for example, when Trump is lambasting the Germans, you know why, guys, you abused us? They say, is he crazy? The American primacy abused us. Because who controls the exchange rates? Who controls the production of US dollars? Who controls, the yields in the system? It's the US. So basically, you reaped us, guys. That's what Europeans claim in Western Europe.
Yeah. Like I can
And
hear in
this,
your
and
voice what. No, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
no, I just wanted to say that I'm also, you know, upping the game a little bit for your probably American mostly audience to understand. Don't overdo. If you want to keep this transatlantic community, don't overdo with the sanctions because basically, guys, you were beneficiaries of the system. It's not that you were abused, like Trump claims. Okay, it was your empire. Okay, and you benefited from that.
Yeah. Well, I can hear in your voice what you think is going to happen. But let's say that that the Americans listen to you and they say, "We heard Jacek on the Jacob Shapiro podcast. We are not going to overdo the sanctions."
Sure.
How does that change the scenario that you've just painted?
Because if it's not done, the Europeans will follow the United States. Will follow the United States, especially if the United States is not confrontational against China and is putting a lot of money in innovation to create a new economy. As you know, as Musk is claiming, and Thiel is claiming, and this is interesting. So less war, less confrontation, less trade war, and more innovation. Since you are such a beacon of democracy and such an innovative country, so prove it, okay? And we will follow. And more incentives for us. We feel culturally the same family, but we need to have money for survival. And nice sunshine on our Mediterranean. We will not change our lifestyle that. We have a beautiful life in Europe. So we will do everything to keep our life. And the Chinese will propose better proposition than you guys. If I mean, and without Europe, US is not the United States, as some claim. And I mean, I know Europe is weak. I know, but it's not weak. All in all, Jacob. Europe has been the centerpiece of everything in the world. It has huge potential.
Well,
And
let's say though that the U.S. does that. Let's say, okay, less war, more peace, more innovation. Like Musk is going to stop insulting you guys and actually start working with you guys. We're going to start pouring money and ideas and technology and things like that. Does China go along with that? And is there an isolation of Russia in this context, or does it become a new Iron Curtain between the U.S. and Europe on one side, and Russia and China and this Eurasian thing on the other, and India sort of sitting there twiddling its thumbs, trying to decide what's going to happen?
maybe, but I think with Europe on the US side, we will win. We will win. We will win in time. And within the American power of capital accumulation and innovation, we will win. Maybe we'll win in space because of new economies and the multiplying effect, but we will win. Without Europe, you will not win. As simple as, and the Chinese will pay a huge price to make sure that Europe is not decoupling from them. And the Germans and French will be playing this card against the United States. And United States leaders shouldn't be in hubris, thinking that without incentives, Europe will follow in line because of security issues. The Western Europeans don't give a about security because they are not threatened by Russia. And Russia proposed them a good deal. Ukrainians ruined it, defending Kiev. And Poles don't want it. But Western Europeans, they don't feel threatened by Russia. They don't. That's why they will not raise up to 5%. They don't need to do it. It's not Cold War. And they don't want to go to war with China. They want to have trade war with China.
Yeah. Is there is there any independent role for the British in the context of the system as you're describing, or are they just ancillary to the United States at this point
That's
from your
cool, yeah.
perspective?
Look what happened to Great Britain after Brexit. They are not existent. They are completely gone from the map. They have no agency, they have no military altogether. I mean, for the land war in Europe, I mean, what future do they have without the continent?
And
I
what
know,
about some of
Jacob.
these?
I, I'm,
No,
I'm,
no.
I'm, I'm disappointing you because suddenly Jacek sounds like a guy from Europe. But this
No,
is exactly the times that
I'm
are ahead of us. We'll need to
First of
make
all,
choices soon.
you were more glum the last time you came on the podcast. Number two, I haven't even told you yet. Like I think I mentioned this to you last time off the air, but I discovered I was cleaning up my dad's house. I found some papers that made me eligible for Polish citizenship. So I have filed my paperwork to be your countryman. I'm just waiting for your foreign ministry. The 18 months. It's ridiculous. Can we expedite the process here a little bit? So no, I'm happy to hear the European and you stand up for it. And I've been calling from an investment perspective that Europe was going to outperform for quite some time, precisely because I thought that all the squabbling and all the bureaucracy and all the things that have always held it back, like I get why it held it back because there was no real threat. But now the choices are oblivion or rise. And I think that Europe is going to choose to rise. I think, but you tell me if I'm
Uh,
wrong.
yeah, I have no idea. The Brussels bureaucracy is the worst thing, and all those people living in we used to have those empires. There was always money. They got used to it. So this is the problem of bureaucracy in Brussels. But the Europeans in the past have behaved like that, often. So we are such a nice, peaceful people, but when things come ripe, Europe makes decisions and sometimes cruel decisions. So I believe that if it were only about Macron, he would already have made this decision to make a big deal with China.
Oh yes, the greatest tragic flaw of Macron is that he had all the ideas and none of the political ability to actually get it done. But
Yeah,
from a strategic perspective, he's the only one thinking long term right now. He could use some company.
this is the tragedy of Europe. Of course, Americans are playing this fiddle well, but again, if Trump overdoes with sanctions, Europeans will be in a survival mode, and they will push for Eurasia.
Yeah. Are there any countries around the periphery that you think about particularly? We already discussed Turkey a little bit, but there's India. There are countries like Japan. North Korea has troops on the ground in Ukraine. We could talk about that. Brazil is there. Are any of these sort of peripheral countries important to the narrative that you're crafting here, or do you think that they're really on the outside looking in at this point, and that they will align based on how the Olympians
In-
treat each other?
India is benefiting greatly from systemic war, buying with their own currency from Russia that is on sale off, and they don't have access to US dollars to produce their own things. And they also smuggle this oil to Europe. They refineries, the global south is benefiting greatly from the war. They want to change. They don't want the West to be on the top anymore. And they benefit greatly from war. So I think the time when the capitalism was only the Western concept and all other things were peripheral colonies producing the items that we choose them to produce are gone. The Chinese are providing the capital goods to them, building their capabilities. This will be a long systemic war this time around. We may lose, Jacob. We may really lose. We may
And what
really
does that
lose.
look like? Does that look like Chinese hegemony? Does that look like
No, a new system of balance of power, like following the Vienna concept, where U.S. Will be a great power in North America, with their Galapagos system of economy and cars, which will be not the most modern. They will be a big country, and also sitting on the negotiating table. And there will be, China and Russia and maybe some Europeans or Europe, and they will negotiate the new trade system, which will be devoid of US dollar hegemony for sure. There will be some probably peg, some kind of reference that the United States can print whatever it wants. And, and this will be a year negotiation process, and there will be a new system, new system. With no weaponization of US dollar and, with maybe there will be no major big confrontation and landing in Normandy and stuff, I mean, but there will be a new system, and the United States will be just one of the pillars of the system if the United States decides to really kill Europe.
Poland also had an election last year, and I think you've already answered this, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask. I take it you see no real change in Polish strategy or Polish foreign policy as a result of the change in Poland's government, or is there more there than meets the eye?
Probably prime minister will be running the dual track. Being close to US and being close to European consolidation should be the last one start occurring. But he's more into the European consolidation, although he understands that we have the security guarantees, to be on the safe side. But if how do you say in English, if times comes to push, no, shove, or
If push comes to shove, you're there.
comes to shove, yeah, and he will choose Europe.
Yeah. Okay. What have I not asked you, Jacek? Is there anything else we need to cover? We covered a wide swath of
No,
things
I
there.
think it might be shocking enough for some of the audience, probably. What I just wanted to say is, I believe that Elbridge Colby will be running the U.S. Military strategy, and he will shy away from confrontation in Western Pacific. I hope he will shy away from deployment of nuclear capabilities in Taiwan. I think he will go to the offshore balancing in Europe. And I hope that my Polish leadership, will understand the consequences and we will build our own indigenous military independent from the US interactions, so that we can survive in this new era.
It's funny you mentioned him. I've been trying to get him on the podcast to no avail, but I had someone on the podcast who was his professor or knew him particularly well at one point in time, and it sounds like Colby's actually pretty malleable. He's had very defined sort of seasons of I think this or I think this or I think that in my life, so I think he'll be pragmatic. But to your point, I think, and I said this on the podcast last week, that Secretary of State Rubio's first little his first thing is like his call with Wang Yi on the Chinese side and endorsing the One China policy, his decisions to visit countries in the Western Hemisphere first. Like, you are seeing some interesting first moves here, not from the White House. The White House is doing its own thing, but the parallel structure that is actually running U.S. foreign policy is actually maybe proceeding along the lines that you're hoping.
I would really like to avoid war that would involve China. This is which is a manufacturing hub of the world. Can you imagine the Ukraine front line? If the Chinese decide to push their material to the war?
No, and that's actually a good place to end, because we began the podcast by talking about, young people on the Ukrainian front lines defining the future of Ukraine and in some ways the future of Europe. And for any person who, for any thinking person who is trying to feel at the same time, if you care about your children, yes, you do not want a war between the West and China. Like, for all of our children's sake, that would be the worst. So.
Exactly. And I believe in United States savvy decisions, and believing that the access to cheap capital, that is always a good feature of quality of the United States, and innovation drive will outcompete China in the long run without risking a war between major powers that would simply cripple Eurasia and also the United States and Poland in the process, because we are in this damn crash zone. So this is exactly what I would like to achieve. I mean, it sounds a bit frightful. I mean, peace and peace. Bartosiak is talking about peace. But we really need to navigate this chaotic moment of transitioning into this new system without kinetic war, and with the hope that the Americans really could pull off this innovation revolution. I really believe in it, the space economy and so. And even for the time being, they would need to give up on some agency in Eurasia, for the sake of kind of, innovation, kind of. I believe that there is a chance for that. Sort of.
Well, and to your point, I look forward to reading your book, and we'll make sure that all the listeners get a link to it so they can read as well. But there's something to be said for the fact that maybe there is always a war once a century that is systemic, precisely because the generation that fought the war and remembered how terrible it was eventually passes on, and the new generation, just inherited the fruits of all of that conflict and say, that's not so bad. Like, we got to fight for the things that we have, and that amnesia is a very difficult place to be right now. So
yeah. So.
And ironically, I think one of the people who know, I'll get some flack for this. I think Xi Jinping is one of the realists in the system. I think he grew up in a time of real hardship, and he's actively trying to steer China away from that hardship. I worry very much about what happens after him. But I think he's sort of the last of the Chinese guard that remembers how bad things were and how far China has come, and doesn't want to risk it all, on just some sort of
and that makes a difference between him and Hitler, who was really, he was a gambler. Xi Jinping is not. Plus, China has such a great strategic depth in production and resolve of your people that they can give concessions for free to stabilize the system. You know what I mean? So even sometimes they can suffer from the U.S. sanctions without resorting to war or to equal steps to impress others that they're still in favor of the openness of the system, which is very good quality to try to keep this damn thing without escalation. So maybe, I don't know, this is a very complicated thing. The problem that historical records are not very optimistic, about this.
No, but they're not hopeless either. And I mean, to your point, China has more in common with the United States than it does with almost any other country in the world right now. Like, there's no other country that understands where China is, and also what China's resilience is going to be in a conflict, than the United States, which is ironic. All of the allies that the United States did not recruit these allies. The United States conquered them. I think we forget the United States conquered Germany and conquered Japan and remade them in their own image. Like, it's not a sort of a natural one-to-one basis. So, all right. Well, Jacek, you're at the mall. I'll let you get back to your kids, and we'll put this out.
Always great to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Jacob Shapiro podcast. The show is produced and edited by Jacob Smulian, and it's in many ways the Jacob Show. If you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to subscribe, rate or leave a review. It takes just a couple seconds of your time, but it really helps us. Also share with a friend. If you're interested in learning more about hiring me to speak at your event, or if you want to learn more about the wealth management services that I offer through Bespoke or at Cognitive Investments, you can find more information at jacobshapiro.com. You can also write to me directly at jacob@jacobshapiro.com. I'm also on X for now with the handle Jacob Shap. That's Jacob, SHAP, no dats, dashes, or anything else, but I'm not hard to find. See you out there.